We have some really impactful buffs to a bunch of champions for 25.19, as the Jax and Jinx changes in specific are looking massive. A few AP junglers will also be looking to make a push back into meta, so let's give you guys the complete rundown on all the changes, along with an update to the tier list for every single role. And let's be honest, picking the best champions is fun, but is that really enough on its own? I don't know about you, but locking in Volibear just because he's OP doesn't really help if you're lacking knowledge on how to clear your jungle. However, you can begin flying through your clears at optimal speeds by using our extensive catalog of clear courses that are going to teach you everything you need to know to have you speedrunning any game below Diamond in no time. And that's just for jungle. Your mid lane OP tier Morgana pick becomes actually unstoppable when you know all the essentials of mid, like how to win lane, when to roam, how to properly play the later game, and much more, as our top 10 challenger player Strompist has worked tirelessly on this course to have you climbing in no time. Our tier list gets you the right champions, SkillCapped gets you the right skills, and we're so confident it works. If you don't climb 5 divisions while actively using the platform, you literally don't pay a single cent. So why hold yourself back this season and finally get the rank you deserve? And with that being said, let's get into it. So starting off with the item and rune changes, Redemption will see a nerf to its heal, dropping by 50. Redemption had become a very popular rush item on a ton of supports over the past few patches, so this nerf should lower the priority a bit moving forward. Unsealed Spellbook has been the go-to rune on many melee supports lately, so Riot has 2 nerfs planned, with its initial swap cooldown going from 4 to 4.5 minutes, and the minimum cooldown being increased from 1.5 to 2 minutes. It's extremely likely that with this nerf coming through, alternative keystones are just going to be superior now. For example, if we look at Rakan last patch, he was taking Spellbook at a very high rate, but Guardian was actually outperforming it. Spellbook Rakan was winning at around 49%, while Guardian Rakan sat at 50.5%, so there's going to be an even bigger gap now with the Spellbook nerfs. And then one more very minor item nerf is going to be Celestial Opposition, so that if the user ends up dying, the slow from Celestial no longer goes off. Jax mains are going to be feasting in 25.19, as Riot has decided to provide him with a ton of bonus stats on his R. Our armor gain on champion hit is going up from 25 to 45 at rank 1, while magic resist gain is up from 15 to 30. To compensate though, base health is going down from 665 to 650. So 20 armor has a gold value of 400, so at level 6, it's like you'll have a little bit more than a cloth armor. Level 6 kill threat and overall skirmish strength of Jax is going to rise quite a bit for this patch, and we think this buff will be enough to slot him back into the top lane S tier. So Riot decided to give Jax a big buff and then do nothing else for top lane in 25.19, as he's the only champ being adjusted in the role. So this means our OP tier won't be changing from where we had it aligned last patch, with Warwick, Quinn, and Cassiopeia as 3 of the most powerful champs. All 3 of those OP tier champs have so much lane presence and the ability to completely stomp on their opponent early on, so it gives them a ton more agency and ability to solo carry than most other top laners. Cassiopeia is just insane right now, because not only is her early kill threat incredible, but there's no trade-off of having a weaker late game. Cass is literally strong at all stages of the game, and with the buff she received in 25.18, there's no champ in the game more underrated than Cassiopeia top. We have 3 different AP junglers receiving buffs for this patch, and first up is Brand. Passive monster damage is going up from 260 to 265. WAP ratio is being increased from 60 to 70%, and R will get a buff as well, with the AP ratio going up from 25 to 30%. So over these past few patches, Brand jungle has been performing at a pretty good rate. He's been hovering just under a 50% win rate, so these buffs should be enough to slot him back in as a competitive A tier jungler in 25.19. A jungler who we've already had in the S tier for the past while now, who's receiving a buff for this patch, is Diana. So Diana's clear speed will be seeing a boost, as her passive monster damage is going up from 260 to 300%. We wouldn't be surprised if Diana becomes one of the highest contested junglers for solo queue as a result of this buff, and she will remain placed in the S tier. And then Lilia is the 3rd AP jungler on the buff list, as her R damage is going up by 50 base at all ranks, while the AP ratio is increased from 40 to 45%. R cooldown is being lowered by 10 seconds at all ranks. Much like Brand, Lilia had been on the outside looking in over the past few patches, as we've had her down in the jungle B tier, but this buff is likely enough to warrant a move into A. Pantheon jungle is going to be a pick you'll want to stay away from in 25.19, as his clear speed is being nerfed for a second time. Q monster damage is going down from 90 to 75%, while W minion and monster damage cap is being lowered from 200 to 120. Since Pantheon is more early game reliant, a slower clear speed doesn't bode well for him, as taking longer to get out on the map just limits his ability to snowball early on. We don't think Pantheon will be a viable solo queue jungler at all moving forward, and we'll be dropping him into the C tier. Riot has a nerf lined up for Poppy jungle, as her Q % health damage cap against minions and monsters is going down from 75 scaling to 195 to 50 scaling to 170. R is nerfed as well, with the cooldown of interruption being increased from 15 to 30 seconds. We've had Poppy placed in the jungle A tier for a while now, and it's tough to say if this nerf will be enough to warrant a move into B, so we'll leave her in A for now and adjust the mid-patch tier list if need be. These Lee Sin changes are listed under into the adjustment category in the patch notes, as they likely don't shift his overall power much at all. Armor growth is going down from 4.9 to 4.5. Q damage is being changed so that the base value is up from 55 scaling to 155 to 60 scaling to 180. However, AD ratio is down from 115 to 95%. So let's take a look at a few comparisons at different item spikes to see how impactful this adjustment is. So with no items at all and at level 3 on your Lee Sin, the damage will be higher as it's up at 97 in 25.19 and at 91 in 25.18. With one item and at level 9 on your Lee Sin, the damage in 25.18 is coming in at 358, while damage in 25.19 is higher at 374. And then with two items, the damage is once again higher for 25.19, with damage coming in at 414 in 25.18 and 419 in 25.19. So even with the AD ratio getting nerfed quite heavily, up until your first two items, the change is a buff. Once you get three items though, that's when it will turn into a nerf, as you'll have enough AD so that the AD ratio nerf outweighs the base damage buff. This is definitely a trade-off that most Lee Sin players will take though, as having more damage on your first two items where the champ needs to snowball to be most effective is well worth losing out on a bit later on. Some games won't even last long enough for you to feel this nerf. If you really snowball a game out of control, so the fact you'll always be benefiting from the buff in every game while only sometimes hurting from the nerf, means this should end up as a net positive change to Lee's Q. With armor growth dropping, that change doesn't really hurt that bad either, because once again, it's a scaling nerf, and scaling nerfs are always going to be less impactful on an early game jungler like Lee. So whether Lee Sin gains or loses win rate for this patch is hard to say. However, we don't see his power swaying significantly one way or the other, so we'll be leaving Lee in the jungle A tier. So looking at the jungle tier list for 25.19, it's going to be Volibear locking down the only OP tier spot. However, there's a ton of great S tier picks right below him. Not only will Jax be a great top lane pick for this patch, but jungle Jax could arguably land in an even better spot. Jax jungle had been outperforming top lane Jax analytically over the past few patches, so with the massive resist buff to his R, he could end up a borderline OP tier jungler, and is a more underrated pick that you should definitely consider adding to your champion pool. Jax is actually one jungler that has been finding some good success in the Volibear matchup, so if you're tired of Volley dominating the meta and don't want to use a ban on him, Jax as an answer can work quite well. Over the past few patches, Sylas is the only AP jungler that had a considerably high play rate, so with Brand, Diana, and Lilia buffed for 25.19, we shouldn't see AD fighters dominating as hard. With Worlds fast approaching, it looks like Riot wants for Ahri to be a more competitive option, so they'll be buffing her R damage quite significantly. It's up by 15 damage per charge at rank 1, and since you have 3 charges to use, it's actually a 45 damage increase during an all-in. It's even potentially more than that too, because of the fact that you get resets with Ahri R, so over the course of an extended skirmish, it's a pretty big buff. We're torn on whether or not this buff will be enough to move Ahri back into S tier though, as she had been just clinging onto an A tier spot as of recent. For now, we're gonna go ahead and give her that bump into S, but there's a chance we pull back for mid-patch if the buff doesn't land quite as impactful as we're thinking. A mid lane champ who doesn't actually need a buff, but who's getting one anyways, is LeBlanc. LeBlanc has been right at a 50% win rate in recent patches, so she's been in a balanced spot, which means this buff is likely being issued to drive up the chances of her being played at Worlds. Both Ahri and LeBlanc are two champs who sell a lot of skins, so if they're played more at Worlds, then Riot benefits greatly. It's honestly probably why we are seeing Jinx receive a massive buff for this patch as well, despite being an S tier solo queue champ already. Rant aside though, LeBlanc is receiving an additional 10% ratio on her W, and then RW AP ratio is being increased from 75 to 80%. So a 10% boost on LeBlanc's main damage spell is actually pretty nice. It won't impact her early game kill threat much at all, but will start to kick in during the mid game when you have a couple of items. So for LeBlanc's tier list placement, she will remain in the mid lane S tier, as we don't think the buff will be enough to warrant an OP tier promotion. However, she'll definitely be a very high priority pick. So when Mel was first released, she landed in a powerful spot, but then Riot heavily nerfed her, and she's been a 47% win rate mid laner ever since. So Riot's going to be helping her out for 25.19, as passive damage is going up with the base and AP ratio being increased. The fact Mel has been such a weak pick as of recent doesn't leave us super optimistic with how this buff is looking. We really don't see Mel escaping the bottom percentile for mid lane, so she's going to remain placed in B for 25.19. We have a bit of a power shift going on with Syndra for this patch, as she will be losing some durability, but gaining damage in exchange. Health growth is going down from 104 to 100, while armor growth is being reduced from 4.6 to 4. It's all buffs from here on out though, as Q base damage and AP ratio are going up, and then E cooldown is dropping from 17 to 15 seconds. So more frequent stuns in teamfights and additional damage from Q is amazing, but will it be enough to outweigh the durability nerfs? It's tough to say, as it will more so depend on the enemy comp and who you're up against. If playing into a lower mobile enemy comp who you can easily space against in fights, then the durability nerfs don't really matter if you're keeping your distance. If playing into AD assassins though, losing durability is going to matter more. We don't think the changes will move the needle in either direction for Syndra though, so she'll continue to be placed in A tier. So for the mid lane tier list in 25.19, we've got Diana and Morgana leading the way as the most powerful picks. Morgana is one of the more free elo champs in the game right now, as she takes very little skill to play for how strong she is. With W buffed in multiple patches, you're going to shove out waves super fast, and since W is the spell Morgana mid maxes out first, she's been loving the damage buffs that it got. To learn how to play Morgana mid most effectively, our challenger mid laner Shori has a new full game commentary for you guys up on our website. Brand mid is one to watch for 25.19, as the AP ratio buffs that he received are going to make his mid game teamfight even more insane. There's a chance the buff is enough for Brand to be deserving of an S tier spot, but we're going to leave him in A for now. Riot just gave Miss Fortune a base AD buff recently, and they're going to be issuing one to Caitlyn for this patch as well. Kate's base AD will be going up by 2 from 60 to 62. So you may think this buff is rather light, but it likely adds close to 1% win rate for Caitlyn, which would put her back in a pretty good spot. Kate has been hovering around a 49% win rate in recent patches, so getting her back to 50% is likely what Riot's aiming for with this buff. So with that in mind, we are going to be giving Caitlyn a bump up into A tier for 25.19. Draven has been a B tier pick for a while now, so he's going to receive a few buffs. W attack speed is going up from 20 scaling to 40% to 30 scaling to 50%. Our base damage is being increased as well by 25 damage at each rank. So nothing over the top with these changes, but they should be just enough to give Draven what he needs to escape the ADC B tier, as we're slotting him into A. One champ who really doesn't need buffs right now, but who's going to receive a couple anyway, is Jinx. So as we mentioned earlier in the video when talking about LeBlanc, Jinx is likely buffed for this patch to try and amplify her pro play priority, as she's been a great solo queue pick, but just not being played by pros. Having Jinx show up at Worlds is pretty important from a business standpoint for Riot, because she is a champion who sells. Q Fishbone's range is going to be increased from 80 scaling to 200 to 100 scaling to 200. So an early game buff to Jinx's laning phase with this one. And then E damage is going up as well by 20 at all ranks. So the fact that Riot's buffing Jinx's early game is an interesting approach, because if there's one stage of the game that is weaker for Jinx, it is her laning phase. So issuing changes to combat that weakness will just make Jinx a more well-rounded carry. This should honestly go without saying, but as a result of these buffs, Jinx is going to be placed in the ADC OP tier for 25.19. Corki has been one of the weaker solo queue ADCs as of late, and he's actually getting nerfed for 25.19. This is a pro play skewed nerf here, and we really can't blame Riot, because having someone like Jinx in meta at Worlds is way more beneficial for them than having Corki at high priority. Q damage will be dropping from 70 scaling to 250 to 60 scaling to 240, while AD ratio is down from 130 to 125%. So it's not a massive nerf, but Corki was already a weak B tier pick last patch, so that's where he will stay for 25.19. An ADC that we've had in our OP tier for a very long time is finally getting nerfed, as Sivir will be losing damage on her Q. It's her Q bonus AD ratio that's being targeted, dropping from 100 to 85%. So if we look at the comparison clips, on your Yuntal one item spike, damage was 440 in 25.18, and it will now be 418 in 25.19. So that's a decent hit there, and it's just going to become even harsher as you get to your Infinity Edge spike. So we're going to be dropping Sivir out of the OP tier for this patch and slotting her into S. So we've actually seen a pretty big meta shift down in the bot lane over the past 2 patches. Yunara has fallen off a cliff after her nerfs from last patch and is all the way down in the C tier right now, as she's just not performing well at all. Ashe is now up in the OP tier after her buff from 25.18, and then Jinx slots back in thanks to her buff from this patch. So Ashe and Jinx are going to be 2 of the most reliable blind pick ADCs for this patch, and then Vayne is absolutely godlike if you can pair her up with an enchanter. Vayne on 3 items with Hexplate as her 3rd purchase and an enchanter by her side is nearly unkillable in fights while being able to dish out a load of DPS. It's kind of interesting the way the ADC meta is aligned right now, because a lot of the spellcasting champs are on the weaker end, with Ezreal, Varus, Corki, and Jhin down in B tier. If you are a less mechanically gifted ADC player, then this meta is definitely a pretty good one for you, as Ashe, Jinx, Miss Fortune, and Smolder are all in great spots. Receiving a couple buffs for this patch for support is going to be Seraphine. Seraphine's health growth is going up, mana growth is being increased as well, and then Q damage amp is going to apply to monsters. The big buff is to Seraphine's W missing health heal though, as it's being increased from 3 scaling to 5% to 8 scaling to 16%. On paper, this buff looks pretty massive, but we'll have to see exactly how it pans out when the change hits live servers. There's a chance that Seraphine is deserving of an S tier spot after these changes, but for now, we're going to be leaving her in A and could adjust her up for mid-patch if the buffs do land super impactful. So it's just Seraphine and Brand who are adjusted in the support role for this patch, which means the tier list is going to look pretty similar to last patch. The big changes to support for this patch were the system nerfs, as Redemption and Unsealed Spellbook have lost power. Redemption nerf shouldn't matter for solo queue and won't single-handedly drop the priority of any specific support, because it was only in pro play to where players were rushing the item at a very high rate. Unsealed Spellbook nerf will affect solo queue a bit more though, as the rune did have a pretty high play rate on a few supports. Rakan, Alistar, Rel, Blitz, and Braum had been taking Spellbook at a decent rate lately, so it's very likely you're going to want to swap off of going Spellbook on them from now on. Rakan is one support in specific who gets hit the hardest from this patch because he was taking both Spellbook and Redemption at very high rates, so we'll be dropping him down to B tier. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So there you have it everyone, that's a complete look at the solo queue tier list as we head into 25.19. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.